This is the talent that brings to life the fantasies, the creative visions of some of the world's most acclaimed filmmakers. The images that you dream of or have nightmares afterwards start with these gentlemen's toolboxes. So Tim Webber is Chief Creative Officer of Framestore, which is a remarkable London-based company that's also got offices in LA, New York, and Montreal, that's working on some of the biggest Hollywood films doing the visual effects. Tim's worked on Gravity, The Dark Knight, Harry Potter, Avatar. And Tim, you create some of the most compelling and challenging images. And then John has done lots of things. But what's really interesting is the work John did on Minority Report, imagining the future of interfaces, has become real world. He has a company called Oblong Industries that has turned the screen interface that Tom Cruise was playing with into a product called Mezzanine with some big corporate clients, Boeing, GE, IBM, and others. And we're interested now in exploring just where the toolkit of technology can go in the future of filmmaking. And I want to start with John. Minority Report, that was a film that came out 12 years ago.
2002, that's right.
And it was very, very future sci-fi. But it's pretty much come true, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit of an embarrassment because the charge, the mandate from Steven Spielberg was that we were supposed to be designing 50 years of future technology and architecture and medicine and sociology and the rest of it. And I think we barely got 10 years out of it. The only thing missing is the flying cop cars, but everything else has kind of been rushed and hastened into reality.
So when you got the brief from Spielberg, how did you start deciding how we will interface with the network 50 years away?
Well, Steven was, I think, very prescient and said he didn't, for one moment, want to see mice and keyboards and that sort of thing. And thank you, sir, for that. And it seemed that if you had in front of you an enormous task and a kind of forensic image sorting task where you're trying to piece together the fragmentary dreams of the teenage precogs that are dreaming of future crimes, you'd need something big. You'd need lots of pixels. You'd need a computer that was essentially architectural. And if you're going to stand back from that computer, all those screens, all that information, then it made sense to control it gesturally, to point as a conductor would, and to use that kind of inbuilt human gestural capability that we're all born with. We all know how to point, right? You point at distant objects, distant space, and you do it socially. You do it for the benefit of others who can do vector math in their heads and figure out what you're pointing at. So it seemed like if we could just teach the computer that, we'd have something that was visually compelling for the film, but also really legible for the audience. And in the end, we ended up essentially creating a dry run for what would become a real-world commercial technology.
So in the decade since Minority Report, most of us are interfacing with these things. Were you surprised by how quickly this became the communication device of choice? And would you go back and change anything now if you had to redesign Minority Report?
I don't think I'd change anything substantial. I wouldn't have Tom Cruise, peering and squinting down at a tiny little screen. That doesn't seem nearly as cinematic. But I think what we would do is go back and show a greater degree of integration between the personal devices that we all carry with us and large screens like the one behind us. So a kind of legible network where the pixels and the information are kind of interoperable, where a piece of a task that starts here might naturally flow up onto those pixels there. I think that would be the next level of exhilarating past what we showed in the film.
Sometimes it's hard to know whether things that become real-world technologies are forecast by the movies or actually influenced by the movies. So how far do you think product designers of 12 years ago would have had their thinking framed by watching movies like Minority Report? And how much do you think it was actually you saw into the future?
That one is hard to answer at this point. The feedback loop has gotten so tight. I mean, in 50 years earlier, it was a slow-motion badminton game, right? Arthur C. Clarke predicts orbital satellites for communications. We get them 30 years later. Star Trek with flip phones, 30 years later. But now, in many cases, you have literally the same people. Of course, Hollywood has some of the most talented architects working as set and scene designers and costume designers, but also prop designers, technology designers. And these people can kind of slosh back and forth between the fictional world and the real world. And it's that dialogue, that interchange that I think is making the worlds we depict in films more rich and more believable, but that can also accelerate the stuff that we like, the stuff that we feel was worthwhile in those films, into reality as product, as prototype, as ideas that we embrace.
Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey has a lovely scene where there's a couple of workers in their lunch break looking at tablet computers on the table. This is 1967, I think. These sorts of ideas potentially could shape the thinking that leads to the iPad. What do you think is going to be next?
Now, that's hardly fair. We'll have to make another movie and find out.
Yeah. So, Tim, at Framestore, you are working on the next at the moment. You have a huge roster of films you're working on. When you're making something like Gravity, it looks like you're redefining what's possible with visual effects. What's the biggest challenge that you had to face with that movie?
Well, simulating zero gravity was a colossal challenge. There's reasons why most movies only have a few brief moments of it, and we had to have extended periods and extended periods in long continuous shots, so there was no way of cheating and hiding. But in many ways, that was not one big challenge. I think it was an accumulation of challenges. The biggest challenge within simulating zero gravity was to bring the physical world together with the virtual world, to be able to film the actors in a way that would enable them to sit into the virtual world that we were going to create a few months later. So we had to make them act and behave, and the lighting environment around them respond as if they were out in space with various large pieces of space technology around them, when in fact they were in a film studio in Shepperton.
So explain the process. So there's the director, the scriptwriter, the production team, and then Framestore is called in to add the visual magic. How does it work in practice?
Well, on a movie increasingly on any movie these days, but particularly on a movie like Gravity, visual effects are almost the first people brought on board, because everything needs to be planned and worked and prevised, where everything is sort of visualized in advance of time. So on Gravity, we actually spent a year basically making the movie as a computer animation so that we could plan the movie, how we were going to shoot it later. So we spent a year designing the movie before we actually got to even shooting it.
And what kind of skill sets were needed? How many people in the team, and what were they doing?
Many different specializations. 470 people at Framestore, another couple of hundred on the shoot, and various others, not all working at the same time, but they're skilled in everything from drawing to animating to editing to computer code writing. There's a huge array of different skills.
Where's all this going? We've come a long way in terms of the resolution, the detailing, the ambition in the last decade or so, but where do you both see filmmaking using visual effects going over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's certainly seeping outward from the screen to take a place in the real world, isn't it?
It is. As I was saying, one of the big things about Gravity was having to merge the real world with the virtual world. I think films are sort of moving in the other direction as well. I think that's a key theme for me of what's going on these days, is they're not, the virtual world and the real world are no longer separate. They're starting to join. And, one of the things, answering a question you had earlier, actually, one of the things we're starting to do is work on augmented reality tools that are very like the Princess Leia hologram message, and it's another place where films are predicting the future. So I think virtual reality and augmented reality will have a big effect on what we do, not necessarily on movies. I think, it'll be a separate strand, but it will be a related and similar area.
Will we be engaging in a decade by wearing Oculus Rift type goggles? How do you see the interaction of the audience?
That seems very lonely, doesn't it? Wandering around, bumping into walls and door frames with a giant thing strapped to your head. Or do you mean sitting in a theater?
Depends. I guess there'll be passive and active involvement.
Yeah.
I think there'll certainly be entertainment situations where you wear glasses of some sort, but as you say, it's very important that it's a group event. That's a big part of the enjoyment of going to the movies. And there are interesting ways in which we are looking to combine some sort of augmented reality tools with group entertainment.
What the Rift provides is fantastic, right? The level of immersion and visual acuity is unbelievable. But I think one of the things I'm really interested in is, even though you're literally isolated, what kind of real-time cues could be introduced into that experience to give you some sense of the people around you, whether they're real and literally proximal or whether they're perhaps far away. Because as you say, you still want the audience experience, and now that you have the possibility of interaction, it becomes that much more important, I think, to have a kind of peripheral vision, to realize that there's a participant here and another viewer here. So I think that kind of design, it's a new kind of UI design, it's a new kind of visual information design, is going to be the critical next step in understanding and defining what VR and AR are.
Yeah.
And do you see the viewer being less passive? Do you think the person we used to call the audience is going to want to shape the action in a personalized way?
Well, that's where I think virtual reality and augmented reality won't necessarily affect normal filmmaking. A lot of people think, it's going to change the way you watch films. I think, classical films are all about leading the audience. They're not about letting them explore an environment. They're about, if you eye track someone watching a movie, a well-made movie, virtually everyone is looking at the same point in the frame at the same time, because it's all about leading them, without them knowing it, down a story. So I think the virtual reality, augmented reality experience will be a parallel path. I think there is a fascinating world there, but it is a different storytelling experience to what you see in the movies, because it's more, there's more interaction from the audience. So basically, I think there will be two individual strands.
Although the gaming world is telling us you should have your personal journey through this fictional landscape, do you not think that's going to seep into mainstream movie making?
I think it'll seep into a whole new type of storytelling. I don't think it'll necessarily seep into mainstream movie making. I think there is a world for a directorial or authorially led journey in storytelling, and there is a world more akin to gaming, somewhere between gaming and cinema, where the audience is partaking. But if the audience is partaking, you immediately slightly take yourself away from the group experience, because everyone has to partake slightly differently. And so, I think there's slightly different experiences that have their, each have their place, basically.
So what you're suggesting is it all comes down to the power of the narrative, the story. Technology is just an enabler.
Yes, absolutely. It always is. Whether it was paint in Leonardo's day or whatever, technology is there's just different tools to tell a story, create an image. That has never changed.
What kind of tools do you see emerging that will help narrative storytelling sustain its interest for an audience?
I mean, all the time, things, in the world of visual effects, we are continually breaking new boundaries. Every movie is a challenge, and people often ask, well, what's the next big challenge? We can do fire, we can do water, we can do all the things that have been challenging over the last 5 years. And it's true we can do them, but not 100% perfectly, I would argue. But also, one single big challenge is completely believable human beings, completely believable computer-generated human beings that can sustain. We put in Gravity there was totally, generated humans. Many movies have stunts or, things like that with computer-generated human beings, but are sustainable throughout the whole movie. That is unquestionably the next big challenge, and also a big challenge in it is how and why to use that tool. I'm sure it will be used in the wrong way many times, because why create a CG human when a real human's available? And that, there are times when you have to, but I think that will be, CG humans will be a next big breakthrough.
I think there's another piece to that as well, which is we can ask, what does the experience of cinema itself teach us about how we could build tools? Right now, the experience of sitting in front of Maya or a modeling program is very different from the experience of watching a film. But I think there's something possible that happens when we take the 120, let's call it, years of cinematic language, which is highly evolved. It's an incredible medium for expressing very, very sophisticated ideas of space and time and causality and narrative and emotional arc and the rest of it. What if you could make a UI, a tool for humans to use in synthetic pursuits, in creative pursuits, that itself felt like cinema, right? Cinema's been a one-way medium for 120 years. What if it were a two-way dialogue? One of the first things that we did at Oblong after Minority Report, after building the real operating system that works the way the stuff in the film does, is to build a system for editing film. And using spatial controls and gestural controls, you could zip through a collection of films, stop on an individual frame, and pull out of that frame a character
using
or a
your
prop.
hands
Yes.
in space.
And bring it off the front screen down to a composing table, then go to a completely different film and find a different character, something that was never meant to go together. So because that interface spoke film, the people who used it, I think, felt really empowered, because by the time we're 8 years old or something, you've absorbed 120 years worth of one of the most capable languages that humans have ever devised. So I think there's something there. I think we should continue pursuing that kind of tool making as well.
What's the hardest challenge you found? I mean, Tim talks about overcoming the uncanny valley. Can you believe this is actually human before it gets a bit weird? But what challenges have you found in helping directors tell stories?
The balance that you have to strike as an advisor on a film, and my own version of that is being a science or technology advisor, is to pull the right amount of real-world stuff in so that what ends up on screen seems sort of recognizable. The audience can read what's going on and kind of extrapolate from what they know about emerging science, emerging technology. But you can't ever let that get in the way of the narrative itself. The Hulk has to be green, right? You can't say, well, according to the spectrophotometry that we've done in the lab, the Hulk would actually be pink or purple or something. It doesn't matter. The Hulk has to be green. So finding exactly the right fit between all of those elements is one of the challenges. The other is to help kind of transduce the genuine excitement of new science, new technology, into a form where the screenwriters and the directors and the actors feel not only comfortable using it, pulling it into the film, but actually empowered. They realize that this can actually kind of heighten the level of storytelling or engagement of the audience, that it's all part of the same fabric that includes things like lighting and cinematography, set design, prop design, wardrobe design, that if you get that right, then you really have a world that feels complete and believable.
So you worked, John, on Ang Lee's Hulk, you worked on Iron Man. Give us an example of a specific challenge that you had to overcome that looked like it was impossible.
I spent a day with Robert Downey Jr. on Iron Man 3. I hadn't seen him for a few years, and he stopped by the Oblong Laboratories. And he's fantastic. He's an incredibly smart and funny guy, and he wants to kind of up the level of technology that the Iron Man films are depicting with each film. And he said, okay, on this one, I'm going to do something totally new. I want the suit to self-assemble, and I want to develop a language, a gestural language, that would allow Tony Stark to command the suit as it assembles itself around him. So I spent a day with him talking about that, and then I spent a few days trying to come up with a reasonable language that would look both believable and like someone could learn it and use it. Again, that's always an issue of fine-tuning. Most of that stuff ended up on the cutting room floor because reality is sometimes, more detailed than you have time for in a film. It's always a challenge.
How much does the work you're doing in telling stories impact on the wider culture, allow us to create products that are not about tools? I mean, you've created a business, John, Mezzanine, based on the technology that you envisioned for Minority Report. Is there much innovation coming out of Framestore that's becoming products?
Well, we're forever innovating. One of the big breakthroughs I designed on Gravity was a thing called the light box, which was a box with nearly 2 million individual lights so that we could computer control the lighting environment and move the lights all around. The problem with a lot of what we do is it's always very specific to a single task, often in a single movie or in a handful of movies. So to productize the new developments we come up with it's very rare we get that opportunity. We do occasionally. What we're actually looking to do at Framestore now is we've started a little thing called Framestore Ventures to try and use the ideas that we come up with and sort of spread them out outside of the people within the company can design things that are spin-offs that aren't necessarily specifically designed at films or adverts or virtual reality, but spin-offs from that, because there's a lot of inventiveness, but it's hard to productize stuff you've designed for a film. When you're making the film, all you're thinking about is getting it working for that film. It's such a tight pressure time-wise. The last thing you're thinking about is making something that goes on afterwards, and by that point everyone knows about it and it would be too late to make a product out of it anyway. So so that's it's tricky to marry the focus on the creative storytelling and making a product. They're two very different worlds.
So you have 1,000 people at Framestore, and it's still essentially a London company. John is based in LA, working more closely with the Hollywood studios. I mean, how hard is it to run a movie-based visualization company from Europe?
These days, London is a massive center of movie making. There's probably, Los Angeles itself, there's been less and less movie making going on, and more in London, really, and a few other centers around the world. So even though it's not the home of the movies, it's not Hollywood, it's these days, it was a long fight to get up there, and we were helped by, various things, tax breaks and situations, but these days, it's a center of movie making. So,
and the talent is there?
The talent is certainly there. London is absolutely the center for Europe, so talent comes from all over Europe to London.
But you've also got outposts in Montreal, New York, LA, so collaboration is always a problem.
Collaboration is a problem, yes, and distributed working is very hard in the visual effects industry because you need a lot of bandwidth for rendering and just, reviewing material. So it's not something you can do over Skype because you have to look at detail of a fully cinematic, image. So that's one of our challenges. Now we have offices all over the world, is finding ways to work together when often we try and avoid it. You can be working on the same shot in two different offices in different time zones in different continents, and you have to be able to work collaboratively under time pressure in those circumstances, and that's tricky.
We've got 3 more minutes, and I'm going to use the fact that we have 2 of the world's most gifted film visualization innovators. I'm going to ask you, between yourselves, to design a future film, to start thinking about something we will be watching maybe in 5 years' time, using the technologies that we think will be available in 5 years' time. Let's say the studio, Cosgrove Ventures, is going to fund us for $200 or $300 million. Don't worry about the cash. Maybe Wi-Fi will be a bit shaky, but what do you think between you can come up with for a movie that we'll be watching in 5 years?
We're 5 years out, but we have to use today's technology to make it.
You think ahead about the technologies that there will be.
I mean, it can take 5 years to make a movie. I think, referring back to what I was saying earlier, I think I'm interested in making a movie which has a movie version and a virtual reality version, and set in the future where the virtual reality story is part of the movie itself, but you can go and enjoy it as the virtual reality sort of experience. So you're tying in the technology of presenting the movie with the story within the movie. I think that that's something. It's about breaking new ground. Virtual reality, augmented reality is the new big thing, and I think it would be interesting to tie those two things together. I'm always interested in movies set just a couple of years into the future, rather, because it sort of reflects more on what you're doing today.
So John, here's a couple of €100 million. Design the next smash hit for 5 years, 6 years' time.
Well, at the end of the day, I'm kind of a technologist and a designer more than a filmmaker, so I'm intensely interested in tools that real-world people can use, and in collaboration. Right, that's the sound barrier that hasn't really been cracked by technology yet. We build technology that's increasingly more anti-collaborative in a way. So I'd love to depict in a film a set of technologies that allow people to work together in real time to do something fantastic, maybe something dire, something dangerous, something urgent that they couldn't otherwise. As a kid, my favorite Grimm's fairy tale stories were always the one where the guy collects together the team of incredible individuals who have this talent and that talent and this talent, and orchestrates their work together. And I think technology can do exactly that.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Oscar-winning Tim Weber of Framestore, the future-inventing John Underkoffler from Oblong.
David Rowan, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.